my 10th great grandmother, Catherine Bonaparte, and she was married to a Scottish man, Angus MacDonald. So I too am Scottish. And my cousin, she comes from a long ways away. She's right over here filming. She got to go home to the to where we come from Scotland, not too long ago. So. I just wanted to make a mention to my family is where I come from. I'm a Jackson and a Taylor. My father was Oliver Jackson Jr., my mother Loretta Taylor. My grandparents, Oliver Andrew Jackson Sr., Colleen Loopy, Ernest Roy Taylor, Gladys Madden Taylor. My great-grandparents, of course I had to write them down. I didn't want to forget anybody. Andrew Jackson and Ruth Corbett, George Burt, Lavinia Williams, Albert Taylor, Matilda Maxwell, Noah Madden, and Elizabeth Cochran. So we're here to talk about breaching the dams, but I first wanted to talk about my family. My grandpa helped build a dam. Ernest Roy Taylor, best known to me as Pappy, also known as Penny and Tom Sway, because of his size and his strength. So he was a lead man, and he was so strong. He would be tied off from a rope. People said that he could hold a jackhammer in one hand and steady himself off the rope off the face of the Dorshak Dam as he was building it. Later, when I was getting my name, Dave Johnson talked about what my grandpa said about building that dam. He told me he wasn't real happy about his part in constructing something that was hurting the fish, but he had a family to feed. My grandpa Pappy, he was talking about his wife Gladys and their 8 children. One of them being my mother Loretta. I can't imagine what the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers thought about my grandpa. He must have been an indispensable man, a native with the skill to hang off that dam with a jackhammer and build it too. But what we now know is, if you put salmon first, everything else will follow. My earliest memories of being in the fishing community, I must have been about 3 or 4, and we'd go down to Rapid River. We'd camp down at the front there, and at the front there's this kind of little knoll. And we always showed up in the middle of the night. So, of course, the first night we were car camping. My mom, she would tell me, don't go down to the river, don't go down to the road. She'd always repeat it. You stay here and don't follow nobody down to the river. And so, I was little, just stayed around the campfire, and you could hear the water. Actually kind of sounds like this air thing behind me now. You could just hear it in the dark coming from somewhere. I didn't actually know what they were doing for a long time. So then later I was in the 4th grade. I was standing in line coming in from recess, and this Karen, we'll call her Amber. Amber was right behind me, and she said a slur at me, and I turned around, excuse me, what's wrong? Well, my dad can't fish where he wants to. Where does your dad want to fish? Right in front of the Dorshak Dam. That was the first time that I learned that I could be judged for something we didn't even understand at that age. But if you put salmon first, everything else will follow. Later, when I was a teenager, I went down to Rapid River. I guess I should have introduced my picture here, but this is the Rapid River. This Yatza is my older brother. This is June 23rd, June 10th, 2023, so it's pretty recent. But just down the way around the corner here, when I was a teenager, we went down there and my dad took me down, and like a lot of my family would be down there already. I was raised by my Uncle Ronnie a lot of the time. And so he was down there and he was always cooking. So we get down there and I'm looking out at the river, and there's this bridge. It's kind of like a half bridge, and it looks really rickety and like it's gonna fall over. And my Uncle Ronnie, he's so proud. He's like, "That's our traditional scaffolding." I'm like, "Our what?" You know, if you know any of my family, a lot of the men in my family, they're big men. The Jacksons, most of them are over 6'1". They're very big men, and I'm thinking, that's not going to hold them. But you know what? They got out there, and they bragged about that scaffolding a lot that year, and nobody fell in. I was kind of disappointed. But you know, it's pretty cool to see something so traditional, and then you see all these pictures of the scaffolding down at the Big River, and so it was really nice to see it at Yawinma Rapid River. Later, about that same time, I was at home, and so I have two brothers, and both of them are big time fishermen, and my oldest brother, he's 8 years older than me, and he was about a teenager, and one day he tells me, "They were shooting at us down there." And I'm like, "What?" I didn't believe him, but he's like, "Yeah, you'd hear a whiz, whiz." And I was like, "Are you serious?" And he said, "Yeah." So me and the cousins were going down, trying to make our way along the river, and at the time, the neighborhoods, so they were starting to build a community down there, and all these new homeowners and everything, they wanted to have their fences go all the way down to the river, and they didn't want nobody on there. And so they were denying us our treaty right of access, and they were trying to shoot at our youth in the middle of the night. And so he says, "Just ask Uncle Ronnie." "Yeah." And Ronnie's sitting there with us, and he's, yeah, they were. I was like, "Geez." So, you know, I just told my brother the other day that I was coming out here to do this, and I asked him, I said, "Do you remember that story when you told me you were being shot at?" And he goes, "No, remind me." And then I got done, he goes, "That's a good story." I said, "What do you think about that?" And he goes, "Well, it was just another day." You know, what I learned out of that story, though, is my brother and my family stood up for fishing so much that they were willing to be shot at. And if they had to today, they'd still be willing to be shot at. Because if you put salmon first, everything else will follow. Later, there was have you guys heard of the bicentennial for the Lewis and Clark that happened? You know, there was this big old huge event, I think it was like 20 years ago, more than that. My Uncle Ronnie, he says, "We're gonna go do that." And I was like, "Really?" So that was my first speaking engagement. I don't even know how little I was pretty young, and so we get dressed up in our regalia, and we go out there. You know where Walmart is now? It was just a big empty field. And so they cut down the grass, and it was kind of like a Renaissance fair. They did this whole reenactment, and they had people being Lewis and Clark, and they had their coonskin hats, and they did these dugout wooden canoes like the ones we came off the river with today. And they pulled right down in there, and then we did this whole reenactment, and me and my Uncle Ronnie, there we are in our regalia, standing on blankets, doing our fish stories. So that was the first time that I got to do some public speaking, and I'm really glad that he had me go all over the place with him so I could learn about all these little stories that we have You know, you've heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a kid. I truly, truly live that way. When I was growing up, there was upwards of 19 people in our 3-bedroom house. Uncles, cousins, my brother's best friends. And so we didn't get most of our groceries from the grocery store, but I didn't realize how special that was either. So we thought we were so poor. We were so poor, having steak and eggs in the morning and salmon and rice in the evening. We always had deer, buffalo, elk, nuts. Oh, salmon. Always salmon. And, you know, it was so good to grow up that way. Fish, I had to learn a taste for that. I did. But, you know, you have enough of it around, you're gonna appreciate it. So later, my family moved over to Lummi. So we lived in Bellingham amongst the Lummi tribe. They're also really well-known salmon people, because we're all salmon people, right? We're all salmon people. So I was over there, and in the wintertime, I had injured my hand, and I had some nerve damage. So when you have nerve damage, your nerve, it takes a whole year to repair 1 millimeter of nerve. And so it was about 15 years before I got feeling, and so I couldn't feel anything in my left hand for a long time. And so later that summer, I came home on vacation, and of course it was Rapid River time. So I went down to Rapid River with my cooler, and I went and saw my uncles, and my Uncle Eric and my Uncle Tracy, they were going to teach me how to fish. I tried so hard that day, but you know what? You have to be able to feel. So you have this big old, that's a 20-foot pole with a big net on the end of it. And you have to be able to feel the vibrations of the salmon coming through that pole. Otherwise, you're just scooping the rocks. But I couldn't ever feel anything, because, you know, the backhand was my left hand, and I never could feel anything. So I went to bed. I was disappointed. Didn't catch my first fish. And so while I was asleep, they took out all my groceries out of my cooler, and they filled it up with salmon. So in the morning, I had a full cooler of salmon that I got to take home. And to this day, I still haven't learned to fish, but also during that phone call with my brother, he says, I'm going to come home and I'm going to show you. So if you put salmon first, everything else will follow. Speaking of learning from some legends, I was talking about the big men in my family. My brother, as you can see, he doesn't look very big in this picture, but my little big brother, he's 6'8". And so, the late Sandman James calls him up one day. He says, I need you to come help me on the boat. And my brother, he is such an excitable person. He's like, yeah, all right, I'm ready. Because Sandman was like, that's a tough guy right there. He's gonna be able to come help me on my boat, and it'll be easy. So my brother gets out there, and they're on a little rowboat. And so he's such a big man, and he's out there bouncing, and the boat's just a-rocking, and he's trying to pull these nets in hand over hand. And he gets done with the first one, and he's so burnt out. And Sandman says, all right, just 3 more to go. So by the last one, he couldn't hardly move, and he goes home and goes to bed, and next day he didn't go to work, he couldn't move. It was such hard work. But he still does that work. If you put salmon first, everything else will follow. So, some people, they still ask me, I worked 11 years for housing before I do what I do now. But now I work for the government side, and when I first started in 2023, my brother Daniel tells me a story about our dad. And he says, my dad, when he was about 7 years old, he went down to the river, or Grandma sent him with a knapsack down to the river. She says, go scoop off the side of the rock, scoop the lamprey right off the side of the rock so we can have dinner. And that's just how abundant they were. So 7 years old, they didn't even have to worry about him, going too far or getting pulled in. He just right off the rock with his knapsack brought some dinner home. Super easy, lots and lots of lamprey. He was that was in Kamiah, Idaho, when he was growing up there. And the thing about the lamprey, it's such a phenomenal thing to me because I've never ever tasted lamprey. Now I've gotten lots of descriptions of what it is. It tastes like the sausage of the river, but when something goes away from the river, when something goes away from our life, it takes just that one generation, and I've lost the ceremonies, the stories, the culture behind the lamprey. And so, that's just one demonstration of what could happen. What could happen. If you put salmon first, everything else will follow. So my mom, Loretta, she passed away in 2021. And I forgot to introduce them earlier, but I have two daughters. One, she's in her 20s. She's going to college here at LCSE. And my little one, she's now 9, but when my mom passed away, of course, everybody helps with the kids when you're grieving, And so we did all the work to send my mom off, and we're having a meal afterward. And I don't know who served my daughter, because if I had done this, I probably wouldn't have given her salmon. But somebody did give her salmon, and pretty soon, I kept looking at her from afar because we're in the Piney Lost. Pretty soon she's got a second plate of salmon and a third plate. And then when we're going home, somebody's sending her home with a huge plate. So that was when I learned that my daughter likes salmon. She likes it like she likes salmon like most kids like candy. So that year, I spent the rest of the year trying to make sure she had as much salmon as she could get her hands on. My oldest daughter, she was graduating from high school then too. So we went, my cousin, actually the guy in the back here, his name's Mark Arthur. He's Warm Springs, or he lives over in Warm Springs. He's Nimi Poo too. So he was beating my daughter's grad cap. So we decided I shipped him the cap, he beaded it, and we had to go on a rescue mission and drive over and drive back so that my daughter had her cap by the morning. And his graduation gift to my daughter was 9 jars of salmon. So we get home and we tell Grace, we got salmon. She had 2 jars down in 5 minutes. I kid you not, that's no exaggeration. My girl, she loves salmon. So when I told my brother about her love for salmon, he says, we're going to make sure that she's the best fisherwoman, sister. We're going to make sure that she knows how to get her own salmon so that she can be the best fisherwoman. So that's my promise to her, is to make sure there are salmon for her to have, for her and her grandkids and her descendants.
I love that.
If you were to take salmon away from us, it would be like taking away air. So I think it's ironic, though. I mean, the Oatmans, they didn't mean to run out of salmon, but I think the irony there is that there's not enough salmon to go around. That's the message. That was the real message in running out of salmon, because there's not always salmon to go all the way around. And You know, the Creator did that. The Creator showed us the symbolism right here today at our event. If you put salmon first, everything else will follow. Hamakas katsiyaya, yokala.